It's just a worthless old farm, stuck in the past while the world moves forward. Those dismissive words from the town official still echoed in James Harrington's ears when his tractor blade struck something with a deafening clang the following morning. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel as the engine stalled, and he squinted through the dust cloud to see a gleaming corner of metal protruding from his eastern field. His heart raced as he climbed down to inspect what appeared to be a military-grade container, partially unearthed by his plow. His jaw dropped as he brushed away the soil to reveal official military markings and a complex locking mechanism unlike anything he'd seen before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We're here about Riverside Farm, Mr. Harrington, the distinguished historian announced, removing his glasses. And what you've uncovered has rewritten military history. The spring sun cast long shadows across Riverside Farm's rolling acres. Fields of undisturbed soil waited for planting, stretching across the 180 acres that had been in the Harrington family for 4 generations. Located in the heart of Meadowbrook County, Riverside Farm wasn't just land. It was a legacy etched into the soil by decades of dedication, sweat, and sacrifice. James Harrington, 64, stood at the edge of his eastern field, calloused hands resting on the ancient oak fence post his grandfather had placed there in 1952. His faded work shirt and sun-weathered face told the story of a man who had given his life to this land. Deep creases framed eyes that had seen 40 harvests come and go, each year adding another layer to his connection with the earth beneath his worn boots. "Morning light's perfect for plowing today, Dad," called Emma Harrington, approaching with 2 travel mugs of coffee. At 32, Emma embodied the perfect blend of her father's resilience and her late mother's analytical mind. After completing her doctorate in agricultural engineering at Cornell, she had returned to Riverside, bringing innovative farming techniques while honoring the traditional wisdom passed down through generations. James accepted the mug with a nod of thanks. "Perfect day to finish the East Field. Your soil composition research is changing our whole approach." Emma smiled, surveying the land with pride. "Those ground-penetrating radar scans Mom helped design are finally paying off. We've optimized the planting schedule down to the exact soil type in each section." The mention of Catherine Harrington brought a wistful smile to James's weathered face. His late wife's brilliance as a geophysicist had always seemed somewhat miraculous, alongside his own simple farmer's education. Catherine had applied her genius to revolutionizing Riverside's productivity long before precision agriculture became a buzzword. Their moment of peaceful reflection was interrupted by the distinctive purr of an expensive engine on the gravel road leading to the farmhouse. A sleek, silver luxury sedan with government plates approached, looking comically out of place against the backdrop of tractors and barns. "That'll be Richard Chambers again," James sighed, draining his coffee. "3rd time this month." Emma's expression hardened. "Want me to send him packing?" James shook his head. "No, I'll handle it. Maybe he'll finally take no for an answer." As they walked toward the farmhouse, the sedan came to a stop in the circular driveway. The vehicle gleamed in the sunlight, not a speck of dust marring its silver surface despite the rural roads. The driver's door opened, and a uniformed chauffeur emerged to open the rear passenger door. Richard Chambers stepped out, his polished leather shoes immediately gathering dust, At 56, Chambers was the embodiment of bureaucratic authority and political ambition. His tailored suit probably cost more than James's tractor repairs for the entire year. The deputy director of county development had built his reputation transforming underperforming rural properties into industrial parks, commercial centers, and housing developments. His department's signs promising progress and prosperity dotted highways across the entire region. James, Emma, Chambers called with practiced warmth that never quite reached his calculating eyes. "Beautiful day on the farm, isn't it?" James nodded curtly. "Mr. Chambers, didn't expect to see you again so soon." Chambers flashed his perfect teeth in what passed for a smile. "Well, I was in the area reviewing the progress on our River Valley Commerce Center and thought I'd stop by with an updated proposal." He gestured to a thin woman in an equally expensive suit emerging from the other side of the sedan, clutching a portfolio. "This is Vanessa Moore, our Chief Planning Officer." Emma crossed her arms. "We're in the middle of spring planting preparations, Mr. Chambers. This isn't a great time." "That's precisely why I'm here," Chambers countered smoothly. "Planting time, all that work, all that equipment maintenance, all those seasonal concerns. Wouldn't it be nice to never worry about another growing season again?" James's face remained impassive. "Let's take this to the porch. Emma, would you mind bringing Mr. Chambers and his associate some water?" The request was an old code between them. Emma's brief nod communicated understanding. Her father wanted a private moment to assess the situation before she joined with her sharper tongue and legal knowledge. On the wraparound porch that Catherine had lovingly restored 15 years ago, James settled into his favorite rocking chair, deliberately not offering the cushioned seats to his unwelcome visitors. Chambers and Moore remained standing, the planning officer opening her portfolio on the small side table. "I'll be direct, James," Chambers began, dropping the forced cordiality. "The county is prepared to offer $3.2 million for Riverside Farm. That's $700,000 more than our last proposal, and frankly far above market value for agricultural land in this county." James raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Moore stepped forward, spreading glossy renderings across the table. "We are planning something truly transformative for this property, Mr. Harrington. Riverside Technology Park will be our most ambitious development to date. Research facilities, clean manufacturing, office spaces, and community amenities, all designed with environmental considerations, of course." "Of course," James echoed, his tone making it clear he didn't believe a word. "The centerpiece," Chambers continued, pointing to a particularly elaborate rendering, "will be the Catherine Harrington Innovation Center, a state-of-the-art facility focused on agricultural technology research. We'd be honoring your wife's legacy while bringing jobs and economic growth to Meadowbrook County." James's jaw tightened at the mention of his late wife, but he kept his composure. "That's quite a picture you're painting, Mr. Chambers." "It's more than a picture," Chambers pressed. "It's progress. The kind of progress that's inevitable in this region. You must have noticed how things are changing around here." James had indeed noticed. 2 neighboring farms had already sold to the county in the past year. The Chambers development machine was consuming Meadowbrook County acre by acre. Emma returned with the water tray, her timely entrance preventing James from responding to Chambers' thinly veiled pressure. She set the tray down with deliberate care. The crystal glasses, her mother's best, a reminder of the family's deep roots. $3.2 million, Chambers repeated, accepting a glass without thanking Emma. "Plus, we're prepared to throw in a custom-built House for you at the edge of the development. You could watch the progress from your front window, James. No more backbreaking labor. No more worrying about droughts or early frosts. Financial security for the rest of your life. Emma placed a hand on her father's shoulder. Our farm turned a profit of nearly $400,000 last year, Mr. Chambers. We're not exactly desperate. Moore coughed politely. Yes, but that's hardly guaranteed year after year, Dr. Harrington. One bad season could wipe out those gains. We've weathered bad seasons before, James replied evenly. Chambers set down his untouched water. James, I respect your attachment to this land. I really do. But you need to think practically. You're not getting any younger, and farming is a young person's game. I'm right here, Emma interjected, her patience visibly thinning. And I have every intention of continuing the Harrington legacy at Riverside. Chambers's smile tightened. With all due respect, Dr. Harrington, running a farm this size is becoming increasingly untenable for family operations. The economics simply don't work long-term. Corporate agriculture and technology parks are the future. Is that why you've been pressuring the county to rezone our water access? Emma asked pointedly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. A flicker of surprise crossed Chambers's face before he recovered. I don't know what you're talking about. Judge Wilson is an old family friend, James said quietly. He mentioned your department has filed 3 petitions to redirect Riverside Creek for your River Valley project. Chambers straightened his already perfect tie. Merely standard procedures to ensure adequate resources for all county residents. Nothing to concern yourselves with. James rose slowly from his rocking chair, his full height still impressive despite his years, forcing Chambers to look up slightly. I think we're done here, Mr. Chambers. As I've told you before, Riverside Farm is not for sale. Not for $3.2 million, not for $5 million, not for any price. Chambers's facade of friendliness evaporated. Be reasonable, Harrington. This land is going to be developed eventually. The county needs the tax revenue, the jobs, the economic boost. You're standing in the way of progress. My definition of progress doesn't include paving over some of the most fertile soil in the state to build another technology park, James replied. You really should reconsider, Moore added, a subtle note of threat entering her voice. Development is coming to Meadowbrook County, whether you like it or not. It would be a shame if Riverside Farm found itself isolated in the process. Emma stepped forward. Is that a threat, Miss Moore? Chambers held up his hands in a placating gesture. Not at all. Vanessa is simply pointing out that as the surrounding properties convert to commercial and industrial use, agricultural operations become more difficult. Complaints about machinery noise, restrictions on pesticides, increased traffic. It gets complicated. We're well aware of right-to-farm laws in this state, Emma responded sharply. And as someone with a background in environmental law, when I'm not helping Dad with the farm, I'm particularly familiar with water rights precedents in this jurisdiction. A flash of genuine anger crossed Chambers's face. I've tried to be more than fair, Harrington. This is my final offer. James remained unmoved, and my answer remains the same. Riverside Farm is not for sale. Not now, not ever. Chambers collected the untouched renderings, shoving them roughly back into Moore's portfolio. You're making a mistake, a costly one. The only mistake would be selling my family's legacy to be bulldozed for your profit, James replied calmly. Chambers turned to leave, but paused at the porch steps. "You know, it's ironic. You claim to care about this land, but your stubborn refusal to see the bigger picture is going to cost this entire community. Progress doesn't wait for sentimentality, Harrington. One way or another, Riverside Technology. Park will be built." James and Emma stood side by side as the silver sedan disappeared down the gravel drive, a cloud of dust marking its departure. "He's going to make trouble," Emma said quietly. James nodded. "He's been making trouble already. Wilson told me Chambers' department has been donating generously to certain county supervisors' re-election campaigns." Emma's phone chimed with a notification. She glanced at the screen, her expression darkening. "Speaking of trouble, the county just issued an environmental impact review for our eastern fields. They're claiming anonymous concerns about our agricultural runoff." James sighed. "Chambers works fast. I'll handle it," Emma assured him, already typing a response email. "His tactics may work on family farms without resources, but he's forgetting who my mother was. Half the Environmental Review Board worked with Mom on the Regional Soil Conservation Project 5 years ago." As the day progressed into afternoon, James returned to his tractor. The confrontation with Chambers had only strengthened his resolve to finish preparing the eastern field for planting. Emma remained at the farmhouse, her voice occasionally audible through the open windows as she made calls to activate her network of contacts. James drove methodically, the familiar rhythm of the work soothing his irritation. Riverside Farm had weathered challenges before: economic downturns, natural disasters, personal tragedies. It would survive Richard Chambers and his development plans. The eastern field had always been his favorite, with its gentle slope leading down to Riverside Creek and the best view of the sunset. Catherine had loved this spot, often bringing a blanket and a bottle of wine in the evenings after harvest. They would sit together watching the stars appear, planning the farm's future and dreaming of the innovations they might implement. James was so lost in these memories that he almost missed the initial resistance when his plow struck something solid. The abrupt jolt and metallic clang shocked him from his reverie. He immediately cut the engine, concern for his equipment overriding curiosity about what he might have hit. Climbing down from the tractor, James expected to find an old piece of farm equipment, perhaps something buried and forgotten from his grandfather's day. What he saw instead stopped him in his tracks. Gleaming in the afternoon sun was the corner of what appeared to be a metal container, now partially unearthed by his plow. Kneeling, James brushed away soil with his hands, revealing more of the object. It wasn't corroded or weathered as he would expect from something long buried. Instead, the metal surface was pristine, with what looked like military markings partially visible. James had served in the army before returning to take over the family farm when his father became ill. He recognized government property when he saw it, and this was definitely a military issue, some kind of specialized container with an elaborate locking mechanism. His first thought was that it might be dangerous, unexploded ordnance or some forgotten military disposal. But Riverside Farm had never been a military site, and the container looked too new, too deliberately placed to be some random discard. James pulled out his phone and called Emma. "You need to come to the East Field. Bring your tablet. I found something strange." When Emma arrived 15 minutes later, James had uncovered more of the container, revealing official military markings and serial numbers. "What on earth?" Emma breathed, immediately taking photos with her tablet. "This isn't—" "Oh, Dad, these are current military identifiers. I know, James replied, pointing to a particular symbol. This indicates classified content, high-level security. But what's it doing buried in our field? Emma was already searching the serial number on her tablet. Nothing comes up in public databases. Whatever this is, it's not supposed to be found. By farmers ploughing their fields. Your mother's ground scans never showed anything here, James said, puzzled, and she was thorough. The container material might be designed to evade detection, Emma suggested. The question is, do we call the local authorities or... James's phone rang, interrupting her. The caller ID showed a number he hadn't seen in years, but instantly recognized. Colonel Martinez, James answered, surprise evident in his voice. It's been a long time. Too long, Jimmy, came the gruff response. Word reaches me you found something interesting while ploughing today. James frowned, looking at the container, then back at Emma. How could you possibly know that? I just uncovered it an hour ago. I have my sources, Martinez replied cryptically. More importantly, what you've found is of significant interest to people at the highest levels. Don't touch it further. Help is coming. Elena, what is this about? James asked, using the Colonel's first name, a liberty from their shared past. Soft sigh came through the line. I can't discuss it over an unsecured line, but I'm calling to tell you to secure the area. No local authorities, no curious neighbors, just sit tight. James straightened, old military instincts kicking in. You're scaring me a little, Colonel. Don't be scared. Be prepared, she answered. And remember Kandahar, 2002. Every day, James replied softly. Well, I never forgot what you did. None of us did. The Colonel's voice had softened. Just be ready tomorrow morning around 600. Things are about to get interesting in Meadowbrook County. Before James could press for details, the line went dead. He stared at the phone for a long moment before returning it to his pocket. Dad? Emma searched his face. You look like you've seen a ghost. James shook his head slowly. Not a ghost, just the past circling back around. He nodded toward the farmhouse. Let's cover this up for now. There are some things about my military service that you should probably know before tomorrow. As the sun began to set over Riverside Farm, James Harrington began sharing stories he'd kept locked away for 20 years. Tales of a younger man in desert camouflage, far from the peaceful fields of home, of a covert mission gone wrong, and of the bond forged with Colonel Elena Martinez and her Special Operations Unit when a young Army specialist named James Harrington discovered information that saved them from walking into a deadly ambush. What neither James nor Emma could know was that at that very moment, Richard Chambers was meeting with the Meadowbrook County Commissioners in an emergency closed session, pushing for an immediate eminent domain proceeding against Riverside Farm, citing urgent public needs that only he seemed to understand the importance of. And somewhere in Virginia, a military transport was preparing for departure, carrying passengers who had dropped everything when Colonel Martinez had called in decades-old favors with a simple message: James Harrington has found it. The night passed quietly over Riverside Farm, the land itself seeming to hold its breath, unaware that by the next sunrise it would become the unlikely battleground between a county official's ambition and the forces he never knew he was challenging. Dawn broke with the gentle persistence that had guided the Harrington family for generations. James had barely slept. The discovery in the eastern field and the conversation with Colonel Martinez leaving him restless with memories he'd long tucked away. He stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug warming his hands, watching the first golden rays illuminate his fields. In the distance, the barn his grandfather had built stood like a sentinel against the pale morning sky. Emma entered the kitchen, already dressed in work clothes, her laptop tucked under her arm. "I've been researching all night," she announced, pouring herself coffee. "There's nothing in any public records about military operations or testing on this land, not in the entire history of Riverside Farm." James nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. "Dad!" Emma studied his face with concern. "You barely touched on what happened in Kandahar last night. What aren't you telling me?" He turned to face his daughter, the weight of 2 decades visible in his eyes. "There are some things a father doesn't share, even with a daughter he's proud of. Some burdens aren't meant to be passed down." Emma set her coffee aside. "I'm not a child anymore. Whatever's coming today, I deserve to know why." James sighed deeply, the sound of a man finally releasing a long-held breath. "In 2002, I wasn't just an army specialist. I was attached to a classified intelligence unit, deep reconnaissance in Afghanistan. Colonel Martinez led the team." He moved to the kitchen table, easing himself into a chair. "Our mission was information gathering, strictly non-engagement. We weren't supposed to be there officially." Emma sat across from him, seeing her father in a new light. The gentle farmer's hands she'd known all her life now carried a different history in her mind. "Something went wrong," James continued. "I intercepted communications that indicated our position was compromised. The unit was heading into a carefully planned ambush." His eyes grew distant. "Martinez and the team were 5 miles ahead. No radio contact permitted. I had to reach them on foot through Taliban-controlled territory with information that would save their lives." "What did you do?" Emma asked softly. A ghost of a smile crossed James's face. "What any farm boy would do. I improvised." He looked up at his daughter. "I used every fieldcraft trick my father taught me about moving unseen through hostile territory. Made it to their position just as they were about to move into the kill zone." "My God," Emma whispered. "The details are still classified," James said. "But the warning I delivered that night saved the lives of soldiers who went on to become some of the most decorated and highly placed officers in our military. People who never forgot that a farmer from Meadowbrook County risked everything when her visual channels failed them." Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Her eyes widened as she read the screen. "Dad, the county commission held an emergency session last night. They've initiated eminent domain proceedings against Riverside Farm, citing critical infrastructure needs for the greater community good." James's expression hardened. "Chambers works fast." "This is absurd," Emma said, already pulling up legal references on her laptop. "They can't just—" She was interrupted by a distant rumble, so low at first it seemed more vibration than sound. James straightened, recognition flashing in his eyes. "They're coming." Emma followed her father onto the porch, the rumble growing louder, resonating through the floorboards beneath their feet. The eastern sky, still pink with dawn, suddenly filled with dark shapes approaching in formation. "My God," Emma breathed, as the first wave of military helicopters came into view. Not small civilian aircraft, but massive Black Hawks, their rotors thundering as they descended toward the eastern field. James stood unflinching as the massive downwash bent the surrounding trees, dust and debris swirling across the yard. The noise was deafening, yet he remained still, as though he'd been expecting this moment his entire life. The first helicopter touched down at the edge of the property, its side door sliding open to reveal a tall figure in full military dress uniform, adorned with the insignia of a full colonel. Behind it, more helicopters began landing in a precise pattern across the field, their synchronized arrival like a choreographed display of military precision. "Dad, what is this?" Emma had to shout over the din of rotors. James's face showed the first genuine smile she'd seen in days. "That's Elena Martinez, and it seems she's brought some friends." As if on cue, the distinguished officer strode purposefully from the helicopter, flanked by a cadre of uniformed military personnel. Despite her 60 years, Colonel Martinez moved with the purpose and vitality that had carried her to the highest echelons of military intelligence. 4 other officers of various ranks fanned out behind her, each bearing insignia marking them as leaders in their respective branches of service. "Jimmy Harrington," the colonel called out, her voice carrying across the yard as she approached. "Still growing the best damn corn in the Midwest, I see." James stepped forward to meet her, the two embracing like siblings long separated. "Elena, when you said help was coming, I didn't expect the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff." Colonel Martinez laughed, a booming sound that matched her commanding presence. "Not quite the Joint Chiefs, but close enough. May I introduce Major General Thompson, Colonel Richards, Commander Wilson?" She continued down the line, each name accompanied by a respectful nod from officers who seemed strangely deferential to the humble farmer before them. Emma stood speechless as more helicopters continued to land, disgorging uniformed personnel, who immediately began establishing a perimeter and setting up communications equipment. The eastern field had transformed into a military command post in a matter of minutes. "And this must be Emma," Colonel Martinez said, turning her attention to her. "Jimmy's told me about your accomplishments, agricultural engineering and environmental science. Impressive combination." Still stunned, Emma managed to find her voice. "Thank you, Colonel, but I'm still not clear on why the military has invaded our farm." The colonel's expression grew serious. "Not an invasion, Dr. Harrington, a recovery operation." She turned to James. "You didn't tell her everything, did you?" James shook his head. "Some things stayed classified, Elena. I respected that." "Well, circumstances have changed." The colonel gestured toward the house. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside while my people secure the perimeter." Inside the farmhouse kitchen, now crowded with high-ranking military officers, Emma watched in bewilderment as these powerful figures treated her father with a respect bordering on reverence. Colonel Martinez accepted the offered coffee, leaning against the counter with casual familiarity. "First, we need to discuss what you found yesterday." One of the other officers, Major General Thompson, opened a secure laptop. "We've been searching for this container for nearly 20 years. It contains evidence of a covert operation that went badly wrong." James frowned. "What does that have to do with Riverside Farm?" "The operation was codenamed Autumn Harvest," Colonel Martinez explained. "A deep cover mission to infiltrate terrorist networks in Afghanistan. But there was a mole in our intelligence apparatus. The operation was compromised, and 5 operatives were killed." Commander Wilson, a stern-faced naval intelligence officer, continued the explanation. "The evidence of who betrayed them, including audio recordings and encrypted communications, was collected and secured by the team leader before he was captured. He managed to get the container to your unit, which was operating nearby." James's expression showed dawning recognition. The night before Kandahar, the sergeant who gave me the communications intel about the ambush, he had a metal case. Sergeant Michael Davies, Colonel Martinez confirmed. He entrusted you with intel that saved our team, but he was carrying something even more valuable, the container with evidence of who betrayed Autumn Harvest. Emma looked from her father to the officers. But how did it end up buried in our field? Major General Thompson's face was grim. Davies was killed the next day. The container disappeared. We believe it was smuggled back to the U.S. by someone involved in the betrayal and hidden where no one would think to look, a random farm in the Midwest. But why our farm specifically? James asked, the pieces not quite fitting together. Colonel Martinez shared a look with the other officers before answering. Because Riverside Farm was owned by the brother-in-law of Congressman Walter Hayes, who served on the House Intelligence Committee at that time. James sat back, stunned. My father sold the southeast parcel to Edward Prescott in 2000. He kept it for about 5 years before selling it back to us when he moved to Florida. Edward Prescott was Congressman Hayes's brother-in-law, Commander Wilson confirmed. We believe Hayes was involved in the betrayal of Autumn Harvest. The evidence in that container could prove it, and implicate others who've since risen to positions of significant power. A young aide entered the kitchen, saluting sharply. Colonel, we have movement. 3 black SUVs approaching from the county road and what appear to be local police vehicles behind them. Martinez checked her watch. Right on schedule. Chambers must have gotten wind of our arrival. She turned to James and Emma. The container you found has activated a silent tracking beacon when it was disturbed. That's how we knew it had been found. But we weren't the only ones monitoring for that signal. You think Chambers is involved? Emma asked incredulously. Richard Chambers was Walter Hayes's chief of staff before moving to county government. Major General Thompson replied. We've been watching him for years, but never had enough evidence to move against him. Until now. The sudden interest in Riverside Farm, the pressure to sell, the emergency eminent domain proceedings, it all makes sense, James realized. He knew the container was here somewhere, likely buried by Hayes or Prescott 20 years ago, Colonel Martinez confirmed. Chambers has been methodically acquiring all the properties that might contain it, using his position to convert farmland to development. Each construction site provided perfect cover for searching. What's in the container that's worth all this? Emma asked. Names, evidence, audio recordings proving that certain officials sold out their country for profit, Commander Wilson replied. People who've risen to the highest levels of government, business, and defense, contracting over the years. Colonel Martinez stood. It's time to end this. With your permission, we'd like to make the recovery official. James exchanged a glance with Emma before nodding. Do what you need to do. Outside, the scene had transformed dramatically. Military vehicles had established a perimeter around the property. Communications equipment bristled from temporary shelters, and uniformed personnel moved with practiced efficiency across what had been quiet farmland hours before. 4 military police vehicles had positioned themselves at the farm's entrance, creating an impromptu checkpoint. Richard Chambers's convoy of black SUVs came to an abrupt halt at this unexpected barrier. Through the dust, James could see Chambers emerging from the lead vehicle, his face contorted with anger, as military police respectfully but firmly denied him entry. What is the meaning of this? Chambers's voice carried across the distance as James, Emma, and the military contingent approached. Behind Chambers's vehicles, local police cars had stopped, and 2 news vans were already setting up. "Cameras! Mr. Chambers!" Colonel Martinez called out, her authority evident in every syllable. "I'm Colonel Martinez, Joint Special Operations Command. I'm afraid Riverside Farm is currently restricted due to an ongoing military recovery operation." Chambers's expressions cycled rapidly through confusion, anger, and calculated recovery. "This is absurd. I have county commissioners with me and eminent domain documentation. Whatever stunt Harrington is pulling—" "This is no stunt, Mr. Chambers." "Major," General Thompson interjected, stepping forward with an official-looking document. "By executive authority, this recovery operation supersedes any local eminent domain proceedings under National Security Exemption Statute 1809. The county commissioners, who had emerged from the second SUV, visibly paled. One of them, a nervous-looking woman in a business suit, stammered, "We were assured there were no federal interests in this property." "You were misled," Colonel Martinez stated flatly. She turned to the nearest military police officer. "Captain, please escort Mr. Chambers to the command tent. We have some questions regarding his connection to Congressman Hayes and Operation Autumn Harvest." As the MPs moved to implement these orders, Chambers's careful facade finally cracked. "This is outrageous. You can't possibly— Harrington is just a farmer." James stepped forward, standing eye to eye with the developer. "That's right, Chambers. I'm a farmer. Always have been, always will be. But 20 years ago, I was also the Army specialist who carried vital intelligence that saved Colonel Martinez and her team from an ambush." He gestured to the assembled military leaders. "These people never forgot. And when I uncovered something in my field yesterday, they came, just like I did for them." Chambers' face drained of color as he finally understood the forces aligned against him. His gaze darted wildly, taking in the military hardware, the officers, the news cameras now capturing every moment of his humiliation. "This isn't over." "Harrington!" he hissed, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Actually, Mr. Chambers," Emma interjected, "I believe it is. And I'd recommend exercising your right to remain silent. The FBI agents over there," she nodded toward 2 stern-faced individuals in suits approaching from one of the helicopters, "seem quite interested in discussing your connection to missing evidence in a national security case." As Chambers was escorted to the command tent, the county commissioners huddled together in obvious distress, their political calculations visibly derailing before everyone's eyes. Colonel Martinez turned to her team. "Secure the container and prepare it for transport. 20 years is too long for justice to be delayed." A team of specialists was already working in the eastern field, carefully extracting the metal container from the soil using specialized equipment. The container, now fully visible, was larger than James had initially realized, approximately the size of a footlocker, with multiple security features including what appeared to be a biometric lock. "What happens now?" Emma asked quietly. "Now, we open it," Colonel Martinez replied, "and finally learn the full truth about who betrayed Autumn Harvest." As the specialists worked to prepare the container for opening, James stood with Emma at the edge of the field, watching the operation unfold with a mixture of amazement and concern. "You never talked about Afghanistan," Emma said softly. "All these years I had no idea," James shrugged. "There wasn't much to tell. I did what needed doing, then came home to the farm when your grandfather got sick. The military was never my calling. This land was. And yet the military came to you when you needed them, Emma observed. That's how it works with real bonds, Colonel Martinez said, joining their conversation. The kind forged in moments where everything is on the line. Jimmy saved 6 lives that night in Kandahar, including mine. We never forgot. A commotion from the extraction team drew their attention. The container had been fully removed from the earth and placed on a special platform. The team leader approached Colonel Martinez. "Ma'am, we're ready. The container's security systems are intact but inactive. It can be opened." Martinez nodded grimly. "Let's do this by the book. Full documentation, chain of evidence protocols. Whatever's in there needs to be airtight if it goes to prosecution." As the specialized team prepared to open the container, more vehicles arrived. Black SUVs with government plates, distinctly different from Chambers's county vehicles. Men and women in suits emerged, credentials ready. "Justice Department," Colonel Martinez explained. "They've been waiting for this day as long as we have." The team leader called out, "Container secured and ready, Colonel." "Biometric lock is responsive." Martinez turned to James. "You should be there for this. After 20 years, you deserve to see what you've helped uncover." As they walked toward the container, Martinez spoke quietly. "You should know, this is likely to cause a political earthquake. There are names in there, evidence that will implicate people who've risen to significant positions of power." "Good," James said simply. "No one should be above accountability." The team had set up a sterile environment around the container, with cameras documenting every step of the process. A biometric scanner had been attached to the sophisticated lock mechanism. "We recovered DNA samples from Sergeant Davis's personal effects," the lead technician explained. "The system should recognize it and unlock." A tense silence fell over the assembled officials as the technician applied the DNA sample to the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened, and then a series of metallic clicks echoed across the field as the locking mechanism disengaged. "Container. Unlocking security protocol accepted," the technician announced. Colonel Martinez nodded to the technician. "Open it." As the lid of the container slowly rose, James Harrington stood witness to the uncovering of secrets that had been buried beneath. His fields for 2 decades, secrets that would soon send shockwaves through the highest levels of power and vindicate the sacrifice of soldiers long forgotten. The lid of the container opened with a soft hiss of releasing pressure, revealing a meticulously organized interior, protected by specialized padding. Inside lay several items: a weathered leather journal, 3 metal hard drives in protective cases, a stack of photographs secured with military-grade waterproof coverings, and a small digital recording device that looked remarkably well preserved despite its age. The assembled officials leaned forward with collective anticipation, the weight of 2 decades of searching visible in their expressions. "Exactly as Davies reported," Colonel Martinez breathed, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking too, "revealed genuine emotion, the complete autumn harvest intelligence package." A specialized evidence team immediately began documenting and carefully removing each item, placing them in sterile containers for preservation and transport. The Justice Department representatives moved closer, their expressions a mixture of eagerness and apprehension as they watched history being unearthed before their eyes. "Initial assessment confirms these are the original materials," announced the chief technician, examining the first hard drive. Serial numbers match those reported. Missing in 2002. Preservation state is remarkable given the burial conditions. James watched silently, the surreal scene unfolding on his eastern field, seeming disconnected from the peaceful farming life he'd led for decades. Emma stood beside him, her hand resting supportively on his arm as they witnessed the careful extraction of secrets that had literally been buried beneath their feet for years. A tall woman in a crisp suit approached, extending her hand to James. "Mr. Harrington, I'm Special Agent Diana Reynolds, FBI Counterintelligence Division. On behalf of the Bureau, I want to thank you for your service, both past and present." James shook her hand, still somewhat dazed by the morning's events. "I just hit something with my plow, Agent Reynolds. Hardly seems like service." Reynolds smiled slightly. "Sometimes being in the right place at the right time is the most valuable service of all. Some of us have been hunting these files for our entire careers." "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now we process the evidence, following the strictest chain of custody protocols," Reynolds explained. "These materials will implicate individuals in the highest positions of power. We need to ensure everything is handled perfectly." Colonel Martinez rejoined them, her expression grave as she observed the careful cataloging process. "Jimmy, this is bigger than we initially thought. The preliminary inventory matches exactly with what Davies reported before his death. This container holds evidence of treason at the highest levels." As she spoke, a commotion erupted at the perimeter checkpoint. 3 black government sedans had arrived, and uniformed officers were engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with individuals in dark suits who were demanding entry. Even from a distance, James could tell these weren't local officials. They carried themselves with the unmistakable authority of federal agents, but not the same agency as those already on scene. "Right on schedule," Martinez muttered, checking her watch. "The counter-offensive begins." "What's happening?" James asked, watching as more military personnel moved to reinforce the checkpoint. Those would be representatives from certain federal agencies with connections to the names in that container, Martinez explained quietly. Their arrival was inevitable once the tracking beacon activated. They've had 2 decades to prepare for this moment. Agent Reynolds nodded grimly. "We've been monitoring certain secure channels since your discovery yesterday. There's been unusual activity across multiple agencies. Emergency meetings, secure communications, sudden reassignments. People are scrambling, which means we need to move quickly," Martinez added. "Reynolds, how soon can we get the contents to the secure facility?" "Transport team is standing by. We can be airborne in 30 minutes. James frowned, watching the unfolding tension at the perimeter. "You think they'd try to stop you, directly interfere with a military operation?" Martinez's expression was stone. "Jimmy, what's in that container could end careers, vacate judicial appointments, and possibly even trigger impeachment proceedings. People have killed for far less." A young officer approached at a run, saluting sharply. "Colonel, we've received a direct order from the Office of the Secretary of Defense to stand down and turn all recovered materials over to the delegation at the gate." Emma gasped softly, but Martinez merely nodded, as though she'd been expecting this. "Understood, Lieutenant. Please inform the Secretary's office that we're operating under Special Presidential Directive 29-Alpha with direct National Security Council oversight. All materials will be transported to Site Whiskey for preliminary analysis before any interagency sharing." The lieutenant hesitated. "Ma'am, the individuals at the perimeter are claiming that directive has been superseded." "Of course they are," Reynolds muttered. Martinez smiled thinly. "Lieutenant, please inform those individuals that if they wish to contest the directive, they're welcome to take it up directly with Admiral Holbrook, who I believe is currently waiting for my call." As the lieutenant hurried away, James looked questioningly at Martinez. "Admiral James Holbrook," she explained, "chairman of the Joint Chiefs and one of the 6 people you saved that night in Kandahar. He's been waiting 20 years for this." "Moment two." Emma shook her head in amazement. "It's like you've been playing chess for 2 decades. More like waiting for the right piece to finally appear on the board," Martinez replied, glancing toward the container. "Sergeant Davies gave his life to secure that evidence. We've spent 20 years making sure we'd be ready when it finally surfaced." A technician approached with a small digital tablet. "Colonel, we've successfully initiated the first hard drive. The encryption is exactly as expected. We're ready for the authentication codes." Martinez took the tablet, entering a long string of characters from memory. "These were Davies's personal codes. He shared them with me the night before he disappeared. Just in case." The tablet processed for several seconds, then displayed a simple confirmation. "Authentication accepted. Files accessible." Martinez handed the tablet to Reynolds. "Diana, you should have the honor. Your team has been working this case longer than anyone." Reynolds accepted the tablet with a nod of acknowledgement, her fingers hovering momentarily over the screen before tapping Access Files. The tablet briefly processed, then began displaying a directory of contents. As Reynolds scrolled through the initial files, her expression shifted from professional interest to shock. "My God," she whispered, "the scale of this. It's beyond what we imagined. Detailed financial transactions, offshore accounts, recorded conversations. There are at least 30 high-level officials implicated here." She continued scrolling, then suddenly stopped, her face paling slightly. "Colonel, we have a problem. One of the primary subjects is Brendan Forrester." Martinez's expression hardened. "Current Director of National Intelligence." "The same," Reynolds confirmed. "According to these files, he was a junior congressman on the Intelligence Committee in 2002, directly involved in leaking the autumn harvest operatives' identities. And now he controls most of America's intelligence apparatus," Martinez finished. "Which explains the welcoming committee at our perimeter." James looked between them, the implications becoming clear. "The foxes have been guarding the henhouse for 20 years. "Exactly," Reynolds agreed. "And they've placed loyalists throughout the system, which is why this investigation stalled so many times over the years." A communications officer approached. "Urgently, Colonel, secure call from Admiral Holbrook." Martinez moved to the mobile command center, leaving Reynolds to continue her preliminary assessment of the files. Emma took the moment to pull her father aside, speaking quietly. "Dad, are you okay? This is a lot." James gazed across his fields, now transformed into something unrecognizable with military vehicles, evidence teams, and the growing standoff at his property line. "It's like 2 different lives colliding, Emmy. The one I left behind when I came back to the farm, and the peaceful life we've built here." "I had no idea," Emma said softly. "All these years I never knew what you carried with you." James smiled slightly. "That was the point. I wanted you to grow up thinking about soil composition and crop rotation, not classified operations and betrayal at the highest levels. Your mother and I agreed on that much." "Mom knew about your service?" Emma asked, surprised. Only the broad strokes, that I'd been in Afghanistan, that I'd helped save some lives. Not the classified details, and certainly nothing about hidden evidence that might someday be found on our land. Their conversation was interrupted as Martinez returned, her expression grim but determined. Admiral Holbrook is engaging directly with the Secretary of Defense. In the meantime, we're implementing contingency protocols. The evidence needs to be moved immediately. She turned to the communications officer. Initiate Operation Thunderhead. Full data transmission to all secure backup locations. The officer nodded and immediately began giving orders to the technical team, who started connecting equipment to the recovered hard drives. "What's happening?" James asked. "We're creating backup insurance," Martinez explained. "These files are being transmitted simultaneously to multiple secure locations, including directly to the offices of the Inspector General, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, who happens to be another Kandahar survivor, and 3 international secure repositories." "You don't trust the normal channels," Emma observed. "Not when the normal channels have been compromised for 2 decades, Martinez confirmed. "The people implicated in these files have had 20 years to place loyalists throughout the system. We have to work around them." Agent Reynolds approached, her expression urgent. "Colonel Chambers is asking to speak with you. Says he has information you need to hear immediately." Martinez's eyes narrowed. "Bring him to the command tent. Full recording, 2 witnesses." As Reynolds left to arrange the interview, Martinez turned back to James and Emma. "I need to handle this. In the meantime, I suggest you both remain with my security detail. If Chambers is talking, it means the situation is escalating." In the command tent, Richard Chambers sat at a metal table, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. When Martinez entered, followed by Reynolds and another agent, Chambers straightened, attempting to recover some measure of authority. "Colonel, this has gone far enough. You're interfering with legitimate county business and exceeding your military authority." Martinez sat across from him, her expression neutral. "Mr. Chambers, let's not waste time. We know you worked for Congressman Hayes. We know you've been systematically acquiring properties in this area. And we now have evidence connecting you to the autumn harvest betrayal." Chambers's carefully constructed facade cracked slightly. "You can't possibly. Those records were supposed to be buried for good." "And yet here we are," Martinez replied, calmly. "Now, Agent Reynolds tells me you have information. I suggest you share it quickly, because in about 20 minutes, those files will be in the hands of federal prosecutors with specific instructions to start at the bottom of the conspiracy and work their way up. The first to cooperate tends to fare best in these situations." Chambers licked his lips nervously. "I was just following orders. I was Hayes's chief of staff. I didn't know what was in the container, just that it needed to disappear." "So Hayes sent you to handle the burial?" Reynolds asked. "Not directly. He sent me to assist Edward Prescott, his brother-in-law. Prescott had just purchased the parcel from the Harrington family. We came at night, buried the container, then covered the area to hide any evidence of digging." Chambers wiped perspiration from his forehead. "I was told it was classified material that needed to be secured, nothing more. And 20 years later, you just happened to push for development of this exact property?" Martinez's skepticism was evident. "I received instructions," Chambers admitted. 3 years ago, a message came through channels I recognized from my time with Hayes. They said development in this area needed to be accelerated, specifically that Riverside Farm needed to be acquired and the land thoroughly excavated. From whom? Reynolds pressed. Chambers hesitated, then Director Forrester's office. Not directly from him, but the authorization codes were from his level. I was told the instructions originated from old friends who remembered my service. Martinez and Reynolds exchanged significant glances. And the sudden push for eminent domain proceedings yesterday? Martinez asked. After Harrington found the container, emergency protocols were activated. I received a direct call ordering me to secure the property by any means necessary, followed by official documentation from state-level officials I've never even met before. Outside the tent, the situation at the perimeter was deteriorating. More vehicles had arrived, and what had begun as a bureaucratic standoff was showing signs of potential escalation. James and Emma watched from the command post as Martinez emerged from her interview with Chambers, immediately conferring with her security team. The transmission is at 60%, a technician reported. Another 12 minutes for complete data transfer to all secure locations. Martinez nodded, then approached James and Emma. We have confirmation of what we suspected. This goes to the highest levels, including the current Director of National Intelligence. The pressure to intervene is going to increase dramatically. In the next few minutes, as if on cue, the communications officer approached again. Colonel, we're receiving multiple overlapping orders through the chain of command. Joint Chiefs have issued a stand-fast order protecting our operation. But 3 separate federal agencies are claiming jurisdiction and demanding immediate cessation of all activities. Martinez's expression remained impassive. Maintain the perimeter. Continue the data transmission. No one enters without direct authorization from Admiral Holbrook himself. She turned back to James. Jimmy, I need to ask an important question. This is your property. And despite our military presence, you still have legal rights here. I need to know if you're with us, because what's happening now is going to have repercussions. James looked out across his fields at the farm that had been his family's legacy for generations, now transformed into the front line of a battle he never sought but couldn't ignore. He thought about the young soldier he'd been, racing through hostile territory to warn his fellow Americans of impending danger. Some duties never expired. What do you need from me? He asked simply. Legal authorization, Martinez replied. As the property owner, you can officially request our presence and assistance. It adds another layer of protection against those trying to shut us down. James nodded without hesitation. Whatever documents you need me to sign, I'm ready. Emma stepped forward. Me too. As co-owner of Riverside Farm, I fully support this operation. Martinez smiled, a genuine expression that momentarily replaced her professional demeanor. The Harringtons, always. There when it counts. The moment was interrupted by a sudden increase in activity at the perimeter. A helicopter was approaching, not military, but a sleek civilian model with government markings. It circled once, then began descending toward the open area near the farm entrance. Interesting, Martinez murmured, watching the aircraft. It seems we've attracted attention from the very top. The helicopter touched down, its rotors stirring up dust that momentarily obscured the occupants. When the cloud settled, a single figure emerged, a tall man in an impeccable suit, flanked by 2 security officers. Even at a distance, his bearing conveyed authority. Is that, Emma began. Deputy Director Lawrence, Martinez confirmed. second in command at the FBI, and one of the few senior officials we believe hasn't been compromised. What's he doing here? James asked. Either delivering the final order to shut us down, Martinez replied, or bringing confirmation that our gambit has worked. I guess we're about to find out. As Deputy Director Lawrence approached the command post, the tension among the assembled officials was palpable. The data transmission was still underway, the evidence from the container still being processed. Everything hung in the balance as the man who might determine the fate of the entire operation drew near. Deputy Director Lawrence approached with measured steps, his expression revealing nothing as he surveyed the military operation unfolding. Across Riverside Farm, the security officers flanking him remained several paces behind as he reached James, Emma, and Colonel Martinez. For a moment, no one spoke, the only sounds coming from the ongoing evidence processing and the distant standoff. At the perimeter, Colonel Martinez, Lawrence finally said, extending his hand. It's been a while. Martinez shook his hand, her posture remaining formal. Deputy Director, your arrival is timely. Lawrence's gaze shifted to the evidence processing area, where technicians continued working with the container's contents. I see you found what Davies hid all those years ago. The Director of National Intelligence is quite interested in those materials. I'm sure he is, Martinez replied evenly. Lawrence turned to James. Mr. Harrington, I presume your farm has become the center of quite a storm today. James nodded, studying the man carefully. Seems my eastern field was hiding more than just rocks and clay. Indeed. Lawrence glanced around at the military presence, the evidence teams, and the growing number of vehicles at the perimeter. You've created quite a situation, Colonel. Multiple agencies demanding jurisdiction, conflicting orders moving through channels, the Secretary of Defense himself being pulled into a secure briefing. It's chaos in Washington right now. And yet here you are, Martinez observed, not managing the chaos, but visiting our little operation in person. A ghost of a smile crossed Lawrence's face. Let's speak privately, Colonel. Martinez hesitated, then nodded. Mr. Harrington and Dr. Harrington should join us. It's their property, after all. Lawrence considered this, then agreed. The command tent, then. Inside the tent, away from the dozens of personnel managing the operation, Lawrence's demeanor changed subtly. The rigid formality softened, and he placed a small electronic device on the table between them. It emitted a soft hum as it activated. Signal jammer and anti-surveillance package, he explained. What I'm about to share shouldn't be overheard. Martinez raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting. Lawrence leaned forward. 18 years ago, I was assigned to a task force investigating the autumn harvest betrayal. Every lead went cold, every witness disappeared, every piece of evidence vanished. Eventually, the investigation was shut down by orders from above. Director Forrester's office, Martinez suggested, among others. Lawrence nodded. For nearly 2 decades, a small group of us have continued working this case unofficially, cataloguing suspicious deaths, monitoring the careers of those we suspected were involved, waiting for something concrete to finally surface. And now it has, Emma said, understanding dawning on her face. Indeed, Dr. Harrington, Lawrence turned to James. The moment your plow struck that container, Mr. Harrington, a series of events were set in motion that have been carefully planned. For years, while Director Forrester and his allies scrambled to contain the situation, another network activated. Dedicated public servants who never forgot what happened in 2002. Martinez studied Lawrence carefully. "You're not here to shut us down." "Quite the opposite," Lawrence confirmed. "I'm here to ensure the evidence reaches the right hands. The transmission you've initiated to secure repositories is being protected by assets throughout the intelligence community who've been waiting for this day. Loyal agents are securing key positions. The Inspector General has been briefed and has secured warrants that are being executed as we speak." "The timing seems fortunate," Martinez observed. Lawrence smiled thinly. "Not fortune, preparation. We've had contingency plans in place for years, waiting for the evidence to surface. When the tracking beacon in that container activated, multiple alert systems notified our network. While Forrester and his people were still assessing the situation, we were already implementing countermeasures." "What's happening in Washington right now?" Martinez asked. "The Director of National Intelligence has been quietly detained for questioning. Key members of his inner circle are being isolated from their communication systems. The President has been briefed by the Attorney General directly, bypassing potentially compromised channels." Lawrence checked his watch. "Congressional leadership is receiving a classified briefing as we speak." "All because of what's in that container," James said softly, the magnitude of the situation finally sinking in. "It's the missing piece, Mr. Harrington," Lawrence confirmed. "For 20 years we've had suspicions but no proof. The contents of that container provide the direct evidence linking high-level officials to the betrayal of American operatives." "But why come here personally?" Emma asked. "Surely this could be handled through official channels now that things are moving." Lawrence's expression grew more serious. "Because there's still danger. Those implicated by these files have resources. Loyalists spread throughout the system. The evidence needs to be secured by people we know are untainted by this conspiracy." Martinez nodded in understanding. "That's why you're here, to personally oversee the chain of custody." "Precisely." Lawrence turned to the communications officer who had been standing silently at the entrance to the tent. "Report on the data transmission." 95% complete, sir. 6 minutes remaining for full transfer to all secure locations." Lawrence nodded in satisfaction. "Once that's complete, we'll have digital redundancy, but I'm still taking the physical evidence personally to the secure facility in Arlington. No intermediaries, no opportunities for interference." A commotion outside drew their attention. The standoff at the perimeter had escalated, with several officials in dark suits becoming increasingly confrontational with the military security. "Forrester's loyalists," Lawrence observed grimly. "They know time is running out. Once that evidence is fully secured, there's no stopping what follows." Martinez's communication device chirped. "Excuse me," she said, stepping aside to take the call. Her expression shifted from concern to grim satisfaction as she listened. After a brief exchange, she rejoined the group. "Admiral Holbrook reports that the Secretary of Defense has officially backed our operation. All contradictory orders are rescinded. The perimeter holds." Lawrence nodded, unsurprised. "The system is realigning as we speak. Those who sided with Forrester and his cohorts over the years are scrambling to distance themselves, trying to save their own careers." Emma studied the deputy director thoughtfully. "This goes beyond just the autumn harvest betrayal, doesn't it? That container holds something even bigger." Lawrence's gaze sharpened with new appreciation for her insight. "Perceptive, Dr. Harrington. Yes, the implications extend far beyond a single compromised operation. The evidence suggests a systematic infiltration of our intelligence apparatus by individuals serving foreign interests. Policy decisions, military deployments, diplomatic initiatives, all potentially influenced by these individuals over 2 decades. A shadow network inside our own government, Martinez said softly, operating with impunity, protected by their positions and the classified nature of their work, Lawrence confirmed. Until today. The communications officer approached. Again. Sir, data transmission is complete. All secure repositories confirm receipt and authentication. A palpable sense of relief washed through the tent. Lawrence stood, his decision made. Colonel Martinez, prepare the physical evidence for transport. I'll personally accompany it to Arlington. Understood, Martinez replied, already moving to implement the order. Lawrence turned to James and Emma. Mr. Harrington, Dr. Harrington, I cannot overstate the significance of what happened here today. Your farm will go down in classified histories as the site where a 2-decade conspiracy finally began to unravel. James shook his head, still processing the magnitude of events. I just hit something with my plow. Sometimes the most significant moments in history hinge on such simple acts, Lawrence observed. Your service to your country, both in Afghanistan and here today, will not be forgotten. Outside, the evidence team had completed their processing. The container's contents, now properly documented and secured in specialized transport cases, were being loaded onto one of the military helicopters under heavy guard. As Lawrence prepared to depart with the evidence, another communication reached Martinez. She listened intently, then approached the group with renewed urgency. We have a situation, she announced. Local law enforcement just apprehended Richard Chambers attempting to flee the county. He had a go-bag with multiple passports and nearly $1 million in cash. Not surprising, Lawrence commented. He knows what's in those files. That's not all, Martinez continued. He's offering information, names, dates, offshore accounts, in exchange for consideration. Lawrence's expression hardened. Bring him to the command post. I want to hear what he has to say before I depart. When Chambers was escorted to the command post, his transformation was striking. The confident bureaucrat who had pressured the Harringtons for months was gone, replaced by a nervous man whose expensive suit now looked rumpled and whose usual composure had completely evaporated. Deputy Director Lawrence, Chambers said with evident relief, I have information, crucial information about the entire network. I was just following orders, a small cog in a much larger machine. Lawrence regarded him coldly. Mr. Chambers, you participated in a conspiracy that resulted in the deaths of American operatives. Following orders has never been a sufficient defense. But I can give you everyone involved, Chambers insisted desperately. Not just Forrester and the others. From 2002, but the entire current network. Financial channels, foreign contacts, active operations, everything. Lawrence exchanged glances with Martinez. You have 5 minutes to convince me you have something worth hearing. What followed was a torrent of information. Names of officials throughout government, details of financial transactions, dates of meetings with foreign contacts. Chambers spoke rapidly, desperately, like a man who knew his only hope lay in the value of his information. As the impromptu debriefing continued, Emma drew her father aside, speaking quietly. Dad, this is going to get a lot bigger, isn't it? James nodded, watching the scene unfold. Seems like what was buried in our field is going to change the course of history. "What happens to the farm now?" Emma asked, glancing around at the military presence that had transformed their peaceful property. "We go back to farming," James replied simply. "When all these people leave, when the news cycles move on to the next story, the land will still be here, waiting for us to tend it." Emma smiled slightly at her father's characteristic perspective. "Just like that? Back to soil samples and crop rotation after uncovering a conspiracy at the highest levels of government? That's the beauty of farming, Emmy. The land doesn't care about politics or conspiracies. It just needs someone to care for it, season after season." He glanced toward the eastern field where his plow had struck the container. "Though I think I'll avoid that particular section for a while." Chambers' debriefing concluded, and Lawrence nodded to the agents who'd been documenting every word. "Take him into federal custody, full protective protocols." As Chambers was led away, Lawrence turned to Martinez. "His information aligns with patterns we've been tracking for years. Names we suspected but couldn't prove. This corroborates key elements from the container evidence." "So it begins," Martinez said quietly. "So it continues," Lawrence corrected. "This investigation has been 20 years in the making. Today just marks the transition from shadows to light." The evidence was secured in the helicopter, and Lawrence prepared to depart. Before boarding, he approached James and Emma one final time. "Riverside Farm will need to remain secured for a few more days while we complete our investigation of the burial site. After that, you'll have your land back, though I suspect there may be periodic visits from historians interested in what happened here." "Historians?" Emma asked, surprised. "Once the classified elements are resolved, this will become a significant historical event," Lawrence explained. "The day a farmer's plow helped expose a 2-decade conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government." James shook his head modestly. "Just doing what needed doing," Lawrence smiled. "The simplest acts of duty often have the most profound consequences, Mr. Harrington. Something you demonstrated both in Afghanistan and here today." With final handshakes exchanged, Lawrence boarded the helicopter along with the secured evidence. The aircraft lifted off, banking smoothly toward the east and accelerating into the distance. Martinez watched it depart, then turned to James and Emma. "My team will be scaling down operations now that the evidence is secured. We'll maintain a security perimeter until we receive final clearance, but most of the personnel will be departing within hours." "What about Chambers and his eminent domain proceedings?" Emma asked. "Officially rescinded," Martinez assured her. "In fact, I suspect Riverside Farm will find itself with considerable protection going forward. Historic sites tend to receive special consideration." James raised an eyebrow. "Historic sites? It's still just a farm, Elena." Martinez smiled, the professional colonel momentarily giving way to the friend. "A farm where history changed course. Jimmy, don't underestimate the significance of what happened here today." As the day progressed, the military presence began to diminish. Helicopters departed in groups, equipment was packed away, the command center dismantled. By evening, only a small security detail remained, maintaining a discreet perimeter around the property. James and Emma sat on the farmhouse porch as sunset painted the fields in golden light. The eastern field, now cordoned off with security markers, looked strangely peaceful despite the momentous discoveries it had yielded. "It's hard to believe," Emma said quietly. 24 hours ago we were just fighting off Chambers and his development plans. Now we're part of a national security operation that's bringing down officials at the highest levels of government. James nodded, sipping his coffee thoughtfully. Life takes strange turns. 1 minute you're plowing a field, the next you're watching the deputy director of the FBI fly off with evidence of treason. Do you think about it much? Afghanistan, what happened there? James considered the question before answering. Not daily anymore, but certain things bring it back. Smells, sounds, sometimes dreams. Carrying those messages through enemy territory, knowing lives depended on making it through, it changes a person. Yet you came back and became a farmer just like before. Emma observed. The farm was always my center, James explained. Even in Afghanistan, I'd think about these fields, the rhythm of the seasons, the simplicity of growing things. It kept me grounded in the middle of chaos. Emma smiled at her father with new understanding. And now the farm is part of history. James shrugged, his expression serene as he gazed out over his land. The farm was always part of history, our family's history. This is just a different chapter. As darkness settled over Riverside Farm, the lights of the security perimeter created a gentle boundary around the property. In Washington, according to Martinez's updates, a political earthquake was unfolding as evidence from the container made its way through official channels. Careers were ending, investigations launching, decades of deception finally exposed to light. But here, on the porch of the farmhouse that had sheltered generations of Harringtons, there was an unexpected peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Fields to tend, decisions to make, perhaps even more visitors as the investigation continued. But the land remained constant and enduring, indifferent to the momentous events it had hosted. James Harrington gazed up at the stars, the same stars he'd navigated by in the mountains of Afghanistan 20 years earlier. The path from that young soldier to this farmer had been long and sometimes difficult, but in this moment, as his daughter sat beside him and his fields stretched out before him, he felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that once again, when called upon, he had done what needed doing. The metal container that had lain hidden beneath his fields for 2 decades had finally delivered its secrets, and in doing so, had reminded James of something he'd always known but sometimes forgotten, that ordinary people, making principled choices, could change the course of history, whether racing through hostile territory with vital intelligence or simply ploughing a field on an otherwise unremarkable spring morning. 3 days after the discovery in the eastern field, Riverside Farm had settled into an uneasy new normal. The massive military presence had dwindled to a small security team stationed discreetly at the perimeter, and the evidence processing equipment had been removed, leaving only subtle markers where the metal container had been unearthed. James Harrington resumed his spring planting preparations in the unaffected fields, the familiar work providing a welcome counterpoint to the extraordinary events still unfolding beyond his farm. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, to multiple news sites, all featuring headlines about the rapidly expanding investigation in Washington. 4 more officials resigned this morning, she reported as her father entered for lunch. The Deputy Secretary of Defense, 2 federal judges, and the head of the Commerce Committee. James nodded, washing soil from his hands at the kitchen sink. Martinez called earlier, said they're just the beginning. It's being called the most significant government conspiracy case since Watergate, Emma continued, scrolling through the articles. Though most of the details remain classified, including where the evidence was found. "Let's hope it stays that way," James replied, drying his hands on a kitchen towel. "The last thing we need is reporters trampling the East Field looking for souvenirs." Emma smiled slightly. "Dad, we literally uncovered evidence of a 20-year conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Aren't you even a little bit curious about how it's all playing out?" James shrugged as he assembled a sandwich. "The fields don't plow themselves, Emmy. Whatever's happening in Washington, the farm still needs tending." Before Emma could respond, a vehicle approached on the gravel driveway. Not a military or government vehicle this time, but a familiar pickup truck. Through the window, James recognized Harold Wilson, owner of the neighboring property and president of the Meadowbrook County Historical Society. "That's all we need," James muttered. "Harold's probably heard rumors. Man couldn't keep a secret if it was sealed in concrete." Emma rose to greet their visitor as Harold pulled up to the farmhouse. In his 70s, but still spry, Harold Wilson had documented county history for over 30 years, collecting stories, photographs, and artifacts with relentless enthusiasm. If anything unusual happened in Meadowbrook County, Harold inevitably appeared, notebook in hand. "James! Emma!" Harold called cheerfully as he climbed from his truck. "Quite a commotion you've had out here. Military helicopters, government vehicles, the whole county's talking." James stepped onto the porch, his expression carefully neutral. "Just a misunderstanding, Harold. All sorted out now." Harold raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Misunderstanding? James Harrington, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. You're many things, but a liar isn't one of them." He gestured toward the eastern field, where security personnel maintained their discreet presence. "That looked like a misunderstanding to you," Emma intervened smoothly. "Why don't you come in for coffee, Mr. Wilson? Dad's just having lunch." Inside the farmhouse, Harold settled at the kitchen table, his curiosity practically radiating from him. "Now," he began, once coffee had been served, "let's talk about what's really going on." Lucy Peters over at the county clerk's office said Chambers filed emergency eminent domain papers against your property, then mysteriously disappeared the same day the military showed up. James and Emma exchanged glances, silently debating how. "Much to share. There was a situation," James finally admitted, "but most of it's classified. We can't discuss the details." Rather than being deterred, Harold leaned forward eagerly. "Classified. I knew it was something big. The Historical Society meeting was buzzing with theories last night. Most popular one is that you found some sort of Cold War bunker while plowing." Emma nearly choked on her coffee, and James had to suppress a smile at how far off the speculation was. "Like Dad said, we can't discuss it," Emma replied once she'd recovered. "Official government restrictions." Harold studied them both shrewdly, then reached into his pocket and produced a folded newspaper clipping. Would this have anything to do with these headlines coming out of Washington? "Highest levels of government implicated in 20-year conspiracy. Evidence suddenly surfaces from unlikely source." James maintained his poker face, but Emma's slight reaction was enough for Harold. "I knew it!" Harold exclaimed triumphantly. "Riverside Farm is the unlikely source they're talking about. What did you find, James? Military secrets, buried files?" "Harold," James said firmly, "even if we wanted to tell you, which we don't, we're under strict confidentiality orders. Best thing you can do is forget you saw anything unusual out here." Harold sat back, undeterred. "This is history happening, right under our noses, James. The Historical Society has a responsibility to document significant events in Meadowbrook County." And the government has laws about interfering with national security matters, Emma countered. Trust me, Mr. Wilson, this really isn't something you want to pursue. Before Harold could argue further, a distinctive black SUV pulled into the driveway. Through the window, James recognized Agent Reynolds from the FBI. "Looks like we have another visitor," he observed, rising from the table. "Harold, I think it's time for you to head home." Harold glanced out the window, his eyes widening at the sight of the federal agent approaching the house. "FBI? James Harrington, what have you gotten yourself mixed up in?" "Nothing that concerns the Historical Society," James replied firmly, guiding their neighbor toward the back door. "Go home, Harold, for your own good." Once Harold had reluctantly departed, James and Emma greeted Agent Reynolds on the front porch. "Mr. Harrington, Dr. Harrington," she acknowledged with a professional nod. "May I come in? There are some developments you should be aware of." Inside, Reynolds declined coffee, but sat at the kitchen table, placing a slim folder between them. "First, I want to update you on the investigation's progress. The evidence recovered from your property has proven even more significant than initially assessed. 27 high-ranking officials have either resigned or been detained for questioning. The network appears to have influenced everything from defense contracts to foreign policy decisions over 2 decades. "And Chambers?" Emma asked. "Cooperating extensively," Reynolds confirmed. "His testimony has opened new avenues of investigation. It appears he was more deeply involved than he initially admitted, including in the original burial of the evidence on your property." James leaned forward. "Is the farm still in danger? Do we need to worry about others coming after whatever might remain here?" Reynolds shook her head reassuringly. "We've completed a thorough sweep of the entire property using ground-penetrating radar and other specialized equipment. The container was the only item buried here. Additionally, we've implemented ongoing security protocols for your protection. Discreet, but effective. We've noticed," Emma commented, "the bird watchers at the perimeter aren't exactly subtle." Reynolds smiled slightly. "They'll maintain position for another week, then transition to mobile patrols. Standard procedure when civilians become inadvertently involved in sensitive cases." "And what about the historical significance?" James asked. "Harold Wilson from the Historical Society was just here, fishing for information. The whole county's talking." "That's partially why I'm here," Reynolds replied, opening the folder to reveal official-looking documents. "These are non-disclosure agreements. By signing, you legally commit to not discussing specific details of what was discovered on your property or the subsequent investigation." Emma examined the documents with her lawyer's eye. "And if we don't sign?" "It's not optional," Reynolds said carefully. "This is a matter of national security. However," she added, sliding another document forward, "this second agreement outlines the compensation package the government is offering in exchange for your cooperation and for the disruption to your property." James picked up the document, his eyes widening as he read the figure on the page. "This is substantial. The Justice Department considers it appropriate given the significance of the evidence and the inconvenience you've experienced," Reynolds explained. "Additionally, there are provisions for ongoing security arrangements and priority processing for any agricultural grants or programs you might apply for in the future." "Essentially buying our silence," Emma observed, not unkindly. "Compensating your cooperation," Reynolds corrected. and recognizing the service Mr. Harrington has rendered, both in Afghanistan and here at Riverside Farm. James studied the documents thoughtfully. What about the farm itself? Any long-term restrictions or government claims? None, Reynolds assured him. Once the security team completes their work, Riverside Farm returns completely to your control. The only permanent change is the classification of what occurred here. 50 years from now, when documents are declassified, historians will know the full story. Until then, it remains confidential. James nodded, making his decision. Where do we sign? As they completed the paperwork, Reynolds provided more details about the security arrangements and what to expect in the coming weeks. You may receive additional visitors from federal agencies, interviews, follow-up questions. All legitimate personnel will have proper credentials and advance notice will be provided whenever possible. And Richard Chambers, Emma asked. What happens with his position at the county? Already filled by an interim appointment, Reynolds replied. The governor has ordered a complete audit of all county development projects initiated under Chambers' direction. Several appear to have been strategically selected to search for the evidence you ultimately discovered. After Reynolds departed with the signed agreements, James returned to the eastern field, standing at its edge and gazing across the land that had concealed such momentous secrets. The area where the container had been found was now marked only by small flags and sensors, subtle reminders of the discovery that had changed everything. Emma joined him, handing him a fresh cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts. Just thinking about coincidences," James replied. "Of all the places that container could have been buried, it ended up here. Of all the people who might have found it, it was us." "I don't believe in coincidences that big," Emma said thoughtfully. "Maybe there's a reason it was you who found it. The same reason it was you who reached Colonel Martinez's team in Afghanistan 20 years ago." James smiled slightly. "What reason would that be?" "Some people know what to do with important information when they find it," Emma suggested. "They don't look away or take the easy path. They do what's right, even when it's difficult." Before James could respond, his phone rang, the special ringtone he'd assigned to Colonel Martinez. "Eleanor," he answered. "How's Washington?" "Chaotic," came the reply. "But the right kind of chaos, the kind that leads to cleaning house." Her tone shifted to something more serious. "Jimmy, there's something you should know. The investigation has uncovered communications suggesting Chambers wasn't just randomly assigned to Meadowbrook County. He was positioned there specifically because of you." James frowned. "Me? Why?" "Your connection to our unit in Afghanistan. The conspirators knew you'd helped us then, and they were concerned about what else you might know. Chambers was tasked with keeping an eye on you, reporting any unusual activities or contacts." "He's been watching us for years?" Emma asked, having moved closer to hear the conversation. "Monitoring, at least," Martinez confirmed. "Nothing in his report suggested he knew about the container buried on your property. That appears to have been compartmentalized information even within their network. But he was definitely placed in Meadowbrook County because of your presence there, Jimmy." James absorbed this revelation quietly, thinking back on his interactions with Chambers over the years, the seemingly chance meetings, the persistent interest in county agriculture, the eventual pressure to sell the farm. "Is there anything else we should be concerned about?" he finally asked. "Not anymore," Martinez assured him. "The network is unraveling quickly. Those who haven't been arrested are turning on each other, trying to secure deals. The deputy director asked me to tell you that your security remains a priority, but the immediate danger has passed." After ending the call, James stood silently for several moments, processing this new information. Emma waited patiently, recognizing her father's need to think things through in his own time. "All these years," he finally said, "I thought I'd left that part of my life behind when I came back to the farm. But it seems it followed me home after all. Does it change anything?" Emma asked gently. James looked out across his fields, considering the question. "No," he decided. "The past is what it is. Can't change it, can only move forward." "Very philosophical, Dad," Emma teased lightly. He smiled, the tension easing from his expression. "Just practical. Fields still need planting, equipment still needs maintaining. Life goes on." As they walked back toward the farmhouse, a military helicopter passed overhead, not landing this time, just a routine patrol checking the security perimeter. James watched it briefly, then returned his attention to the immediate tasks at hand. "I need to finish calibrating the planter for the West Field," he said. "You working on those soil samples this afternoon?" Emma nodded, falling into step beside him. "The lab results came back this morning. The nitrogen content is higher than expected, which might affect our fertilizer calculations." "Your mother would have a theory about that," James said with a fond smile. "She always said the West Field had its own personality." "She wasn't wrong," Emma agreed. "I'm going to run some additional tests before making final recommendations." This comfortable return to routine farming matters continued as they reached the equipment barn, where James's tractor waited for its afternoon work. The remarkable events of the past few days settled into the background, not forgotten, but integrated into the ongoing life of Riverside Farm. Later that afternoon, as James worked the West Field, he noticed a black sedan approaching along the county road. It slowed as it passed the farm entrance, where the security detail discreetly monitored all traffic. After a brief exchange with the guards, the vehicle continued without turning in, but James caught a glimpse of the driver, a face he recognized from news reports as one of the Justice Department prosecutors handling the conspiracy case. Just checking on their star witness, James thought, with a mixture of amusement and resignation. He suspected Riverside Farm would receive such visits for some time to come, quiet reminders of its unexpected place in a history few would ever fully know. The sun was beginning to set when James finally turned the tractor toward home, the day's work completed. As he approached the farmhouse, he noticed Emma on the porch with an unexpected visitor, Deputy Director Lawrence, now without his security detail, sitting casually with a cup of coffee. "Evening, Mr. Harrington," Lawrence greeted him as James climbed the porch steps. "Hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I was passing through the area and wanted to check in personally." "The deputy director was just telling me about the latest developments," Emma explained. "It's extensive." Lawrence nodded gravely. "More extensive than we initially believed. The network had influence in defense contracting, judicial appointments, regulatory agencies, a systematic infiltration spanning 2 decades. What you found has triggered the most significant counterintelligence operation in a generation." "Glad to help," James said simply, taking a seat. "Though I still maintain it was just a lucky accident." "I don't believe in accidents of that magnitude," Lawrence replied, echoing Emma's earlier sentiment. "Sometimes the right discovery falls to the right person at precisely the right moment." James accepted the coffee Emma offered, more comfortable with the deputy director in this informal setting than during their previous high-pressure meeting. "Any more resignations today?" "4," Lawrence confirmed, "plus 17 suspensions across various agencies pending further investigation. The President has established a special independent commission to examine the full scope of the infiltration and recommend systematic reforms." "And Chambers?" James asked. "Negotiating a plea agreement," Lawrence replied. "His cooperation has been valuable, though his claims of being an unwitting participant are wearing thin as more evidence emerges. He'll likely face substantial charges regardless of his assistance." As twilight deepened around Riverside Farm, the conversation shifted to the practical implications for the Harringtons. Lawrence reassured them that the enhanced security would be gradually reduced as the immediate sensitivity of the case diminished, though some protective measures would remain in place for the foreseeable future. "The non-disclosure agreements you signed today are crucial," Lawrence emphasized. "The full story of what happened here cannot become public knowledge until the investigation is complete and prosecutions have concluded. That could take years." "What should we tell people in the meantime?" Emma asked. "The whole county saw the military presence here. Questions are inevitable." "The official explanation is a routine recovery of old military equipment accidentally buried on private property," Lawrence explained. "Nothing classified, nothing connected to current events. Boring enough that most people will lose interest quickly." "Except Harold Wilson and the Historical Society," James pointed out. "They're like dogs with a bone when it comes to local history." Lawrence smiled slightly. "We've prepared for that contingency. The Historical Society will receive official notification tomorrow that a Cold War-era communications component was recovered from your property. Technically true, just omitting its significance and the conspiracy connection." As night fell completely, Lawrence prepared to depart. Standing on the porch steps, he turned to James with an expression of genuine respect. 20 years ago, in Afghanistan, you carried vital intelligence through hostile territory because it was the right thing to do. Today, you've helped expose a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of our government. Some people spend their entire lives without facing such moments of consequence. You've now had 2. James shrugged modestly. "Just doing what needed doing." "That's precisely what makes it remarkable," Lawrence replied. "Most people don't. They look away, make excuses, choose the easier path. The willingness to do what's necessary, regardless of personal cost, that's rarer than you might think." After Lawrence departed, James and Emma remained on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear spring sky. The same stars, James reflected, that had guided him through the mountains of Afghanistan all those years ago. "Dad." Emma's voice broke into his thoughts. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if you hadn't gone to Afghanistan? If you'd stayed on the farm when Grandpa got sick?" James considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, but your grandfather understood why I needed to serve, even if he needed help here. Some duties can't be set aside, like carrying messages through enemy territory," Emma suggested, "or unearthing buried secrets." "Exactly like that," James agreed softly. "Some things, once you see them, you can't unsee, can't walk away from. You just have to do what's right and let the consequences follow." They sat in companionable silence for a while. The rhythmic sounds of the countryside, crickets, distant owls, the gentle rustle of wind through the fields, creating a peaceful backdrop to their thoughts. "What happens tomorrow?" Emma finally asked. James smiled, the answer simple and grounding after days of extraordinary events. Tomorrow we farm, just like we did yesterday, just like we'll do the day after. The land doesn't care about conspiracies or classified information. It just needs tending. That simple? That is essential, James corrected gently. When everything else gets complicated, you return to what matters most. For us, that's this land. As they prepared to head inside for the night, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the sky, a momentary flash of light against the darkness, then gone, like the brief intersection of James Harrington's quiet farming life with matters of national security. Tomorrow, the headlines would continue to announce resignations and investigations. Prosecutors would build their cases, and historians would, someday, record the full story of the conspiracy that had reached the highest levels of American government. But here at Riverside Farm, the rhythms of agricultural life would continue uninterrupted, planting, growing, harvesting, the eternal cycle that had sustained the Harrington family for generations. The eastern field would eventually be replanted. The security presence would gradually disappear, and in time the remarkable events of these spring days would become just another layer in the rich history of the land and the family that tended it. James Harrington, once a young soldier carrying vital intelligence through hostile territory, and now a farmer who had uncovered buried secrets with his plow, would continue doing what he had always done best, taking care of what needed taking care of one day at a time, with quiet competence and unwavering integrity. 6 months after the discovery that shook Washington to its core, Riverside Farm had settled back into its seasonal rhythms. The eastern field now showed no trace of the military operation that had unfolded there, just neat rows of corn stretching toward the horizon. The security detail had departed weeks ago, leaving only occasional check-ins from federal agents who had become almost like family friends. James sat in his favorite chair, on the porch, reading the morning newspaper. The headlines no longer featured the conspiracy case daily, but the aftershocks continued. 14 more convictions in government infiltration case, read the headline on page 3. "Morning, Dad," Emma called, emerging from the house with 2 steaming mugs. Channel 5 called again. "They're doing a special report on the farmer who changed history and really want an interview." James accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Told them the same thing I told the others. Not interested." "That's what I said," Emma confirmed, settling into the chair beside him. "Though Professor Abernathy from the University History Department is still hoping you'll consider contributing to his oral history project once the classified restrictions are lifted." Before James could respond, a sleek government vehicle turned into their driveway. Deputy Director Lawrence emerged, looking more relaxed than they'd ever seen him, dressed in casual clothes rather than his usual formal suit. "Mr. Harrington, Dr. Harrington," he greeted them warmly. "Beautiful morning for a visit." "You're getting predictable, Director," James observed, with a slight smile. "3rd Saturday of the month, right on schedule." Lawrence laughed as he climbed the porch steps. "Some habits are worth maintaining. Besides, I bring news you'll want to hear." Over coffee, Lawrence updated them on the investigation's progress. The final report to Congress was submitted yesterday. 327 pages detailing 2 decades of infiltration and influence operations, 78 individuals indicted, 42 already convicted or having entered guilty pleas. "And Chambers," Emma asked, "sentenced yesterday. 12 years with the possibility of parole after 8 in exchange for his continued cooperation." James nodded, satisfied with this resolution. "And what about the classification of what happened here?" Lawrence smiled. "That's why I came in person. The President has signed an executive order allowing limited disclosure of Riverside Farm's role in the case. You're no longer prohibited from acknowledging that you discovered evidence of national significance, though the specific details remain classified." "Why the change?" Emma asked. "Partially recognition of the public interest in the case, but mostly because of this." Lawrence handed James an official envelope bearing the presidential seal. "The President would like to formally recognize your service, both in Afghanistan and here at home. There's going to be a ceremony at the White House next month." James stared at the invitation in disbelief. "A ceremony? For plowing a field?" "For uncovering a conspiracy that threatened national security," Lawrence corrected. "For doing the right thing when it would have been easier to look the other way." He paused. "The President specifically mentioned that your actions embodied the best of American values, ordinary citizens standing up for truth and justice, regardless of personal cost." Emma beamed with pride. "You should accept, Dad. You deserve the recognition." James looked uncertain, turning the invitation over in his weathered hands. "I don't know about ceremonies and spotlights. Never been much for that sort of thing." "Consider it," Lawrence encouraged. "Not for yourself, but for what it represents. People need to be reminded that one person doing the right thing can change the course of history. Your story inspires that kind of courage." After Lawrence departed, James walked out to the eastern field, standing where his plow had struck the container that fateful day. The corn stood tall around him, no different from any other section of the farm. Nature reclaiming the space. Where momentous events had unfolded, Emma joined him, respecting his silence for a moment before speaking. "You're going to accept, aren't you?" James nodded slowly. "I suppose some stories need telling, even parts of them." 2 weeks later, Harold Wilson arrived with the entire Historical Society in tow, notebooks and cameras ready. With the relaxed classification restrictions, James had finally agreed to provide a limited account of what had happened for the county. "Records, just the basic facts," he cautioned as they set up in the farmhouse living room. "Most details remain classified." "We understand," Harold assured him eagerly. "Just tell us what you can about the day that made Riverside Farm a footnote in American history books." James smiled slightly. "Not a footnote. Just a reminder that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you're simply doing your job, paying attention to what's right in front of you." As James began recounting his story, the discovery, the military arrival, the subsequent investigation, Emma noticed a quiet pride in her father's voice that hadn't been there before. Not pride in recognition or attention, but in knowing he had done what was right when it mattered most. Outside, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Riverside Farm, illuminating fields that had sustained generations of Harringtons and now held a place in a history few would ever fully know. The eastern field, once the center of extraordinary events, now simply grew corn like any other, a testament to the enduring rhythms of life that continue long after headlines fade and history moves on. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. We work hard to bring you these incredible true stories that demonstrate how ordinary people can find themselves at the center of extraordinary events. There are 2 more remarkable stories waiting for you on your screen. Just click to discover how everyday heroes have changed the course of history through simple acts of courage and integrity. Don't miss our next upload coming tomorrow. It might just be the most shocking revelation yet.